It's a great pleasure to welcome our guest for the evening. He's a journalist and author of such books including Death of the Liberal Class, Empire of Illusion, and America, The Farewell Tour, among many others. He also writes on Substack at the Chris Hedges Report, and he's on YouTube at the Chris Hedges YouTube channel. Please welcome Chris Hedges. Chris, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Keaton and Russ.
Thank you,
Absolutely.
Chris.
And we are convened tonight because you are going to be a featured speaker. I should have mentioned that in the intro, rather, at the Workers' Strike Back conference in Seattle this Saturday.
Yeah. I've been a long supporter of Shama.
Yep, as have we.
All right, well, let's get into it with a very cheerful premise. We want you to take us out of the darkness here, Chris. We want you to light the way.
You got the wrong guess.
Well, it's good to have someone, because I get accused of being a doomer. And I feel like, you're more of a doomer than me. But the thing is, I'm not as smart as you. If I were as smart as you, then I could pull off being a doomer. People would respect me more. Instead, they just think I'm a crank.
Well, it's not like I want to be a doomer. I just don't believe in kind of this mania of hope, this false kind of optimism, because you don't see where you're going. You don't understand where you're headed. And in some ways, it's disempowering because you don't understand how bad it is. And all of my books, you mentioned some of them, but like American Fascists, The Christian Right and the War in America, American Farewell Tour, Empire of Illusion, The End of Literacy, The Triumph of Spectacle, Death of the Liberal Class, Days of Destruction, Days of Revolt, which I did with Joe Sacco, the cartoonist.
But what about the cookbook? You have that cookbook.
The cookbook I haven't done yet.
Yeah.
But it's all of these books were really saying, there are consequences for this decay. There are consequences for this social inequality.
Right.
There are consequences for deindustrialization and the mass layoffs of 30 million workers since 1996 when they began keeping records. And unfortunately now those of us, and there were a few of us, Noam Chomsky and Barbara Ehrenreich, Ralph Nader, who I work for, we've been saying this for a long time, and unfortunately now it's come to pass. We're in really serious trouble.
All right, I'm gonna set you up to white pill everybody, Chris.
Okay.
It's gonna completely play against expectations. So my lifetime, the left, they've never been as broken, routed, completely defeated as they are right now on every level, culturally, spiritually, intellectually. I was talking about this on the show the other day. You might say, well, in the 50s, they were more defeated. Not really. You had a counterculture ready to come out of the shadows only a few years later. There's nothing like that visible on the horizon. Now, you have talked a lot about how they created kind of an alternative culture in the Eastern Bloc countries during the Cold War. And you've suggested that's a way to create an alternative culture and even a government in waiting. How would the left do that, or the society as a whole do that from where we are now? Do you think it's possible? And what would be the way forward?
It's possible, of course, but we're almost starting from scratch because, as you correctly pointed out, the left has been completely decimated. And this is something that Shama understands with Workers' Strike Back. We need the only weapon we have by which we can essentially put pressure on the centers of power is the strike. Disrupt or civil disobedience that disrupts the machinery of power. So I was just in London not long ago for my friend Roger Hallam, who founded Extinction Rebellion. He's serving a 5-year prison sentence because they shut down the M25 motorway, which runs around London for 4 days. That's what we have to do. But that takes it takes organization, but it also takes a vision. I think a political vision. And you're right, the left got sidetracked with kind of woke politics and and I'm all for inclusivity, but not divorced from the class struggle. And essentially the power structure, the corporations, the Democratic Party, academia, they seized on this, this kind of call for inclusivity to essentially put women or people of color, Obama would be the perfect example, to manage the empire or manage corporations. And that's the inverse of what we have to do. I mean, having a woman CEO is not a great stride forward for feminism. It's empowering working women. It's and so it's a species really of kind of corporate colonialism. I used to work in the Congo, for instance, and I was overseas for 20 years as a foreign correspondent. So you had a figure like Patrice Lumumba, the great revolutionary. Well, the CIA and the French intelligence assassinated him and replaced him with Mobutu, who was also Congolese, also black, but did the bidding of the CIA and the old colonial masters. And that's what you have here. You have people who are willing to, as Cornel West called Obama a black mascot for Wall Street, which he was. And the left got completely bamboozled by this and used. So all of that inclusivity is great, but not when it's divorced from the class struggle.
Do you think that the... Sorry, go ahead.
Do you think, I mean, since we got onto this topic, Gray Zone recently did an article about how the IRI was actually funding LGBTQ activism in Bangladesh, essentially to destabilize the government. And I, looking at that, I said, well, wouldn't it be naive when you look at how that kind of politics has decimated left organizing, a kind of divisive, mutated version of civil rights with a tortured postmodernism imposed on it? Do you feel that some of that has been directed in the same way by the intelligence services to keep workers and the left divided?
Yeah, or more importantly, by corporate power. So corporate power has embraced all of this stuff. The Israeli military does. The CIA does. They put out that ad. What was it? A few months ago with, I don't know, binary, whatever it was.
We showed that on the show
I can
a
assure
couple
you
weeks ago.
that
Yeah,
being tortured in Guantanamo Bay, you don't really care whether the person is non-binary or binary or trans or whatever it is. So, if you're suffering from the aerial attacks in Gaza, it doesn't really matter who's flying the plane. And that's the question that wasn't asked. What mechanisms of power are you serving? And what are these mechanisms doing, whether they're corporate, whether they're imperial, Zionist, or anything else? And that was the great failing of the left, not to ask those questions. And they got taken for a ride.
it seems as though the liberal class has discredited the left in that way, to the point where now, you were on Revolutionary Blackout Network with our friend Nick Cruz, who's going to be submitting a video speech to the conference. And when we were last on with him, he made what I thought was a great point, which is that it's a mistake for the left to side with liberals on a lot of these more culture war issues. Now you mentioned, that you're all for inclusivity, as are we. Is that a challenge? Because that's a challenge I see on the left, not to cede to, bigotries and racism and things like that, while at the same time you don't want to ally with liberals on these culture war issues, because then especially working class people get the impression that we're with them. And that's what got us to this point. Is I think the liberals have used these issues to just completely discredit the left, broadly speaking.
Yeah, so the focus has got to be the class struggle. This kind of corporate coup d'etat in slow motion is over, and we've lost. And the oligarchs are now throttling what's left of our very anemic democracy. Many people on the left are cheering the dismantling of the deep state. And I'm no friend of the deep state, of course. But what they aren't seeing, they don't understand what this is about, and they don't understand what's coming next. It's the people in the Trump administration who are carrying out these mass firings and obliterating whole agencies are not going to free us from the tyranny of intelligence agencies or militarized police or the carceral system or the predatory corporations or mass surveillance. They're not going to restore the rule of law and make the billionaire class accountable. And they're certainly not going to slash the unaccountable spending of $1 trillion by the Pentagon. What they're doing is essentially turning these bureaucratic structures into something even more pernicious, filling them, of course, with people who come out of the Christian right, Christian fascists, I call them. I'm a divinity school graduate, so I'm not anti-religion in any way. I see these people as heretics. So, the collapse of the left frightens me because we're at a moment when we desperately need a militant left. If you look at the 1930s, and we've written the Communist Party out of American history, they're a very important part of the militant movement, especially in the labor movement. Europe went one way. We went another, a kind of quasi-socialist, because enough pressure was put on oligarchs, the oligarchic class like FDR, to respond. And there's a letter which I've read that FDR writes to his brother and said, if we don't make concessions, and of course the government at that point was employing 12 million people, 12 million government created jobs, we'll get revolution. And the specter of the 1917 revolution, of course, still loomed large within the capitalist world. So we've divorced ourselves. I remember Ralph saying, what we have to be doing is organizing in places like Walmart, unions. And we don't ask people whether they voted for Trump or didn't vote for Trump or what they think about gay people. The point is to focus them on where the centers of power are, not on those scapegoated figures that these fascists used. And I think with this kind of drive towards ideological purity and virtue signaling and everything else, we cut ourselves off from a working class, a very distressed working class. And some of these people obviously embrace belief systems that I don't, and even may find abhorrent. But the struggle is a class struggle.
Please clap.